I've always enjoyed having the freedom to work out on my own schedule, so when I heard about a new 24-hour gym opening up nearby, I jumped at the chance to join. After a long day at the office, hitting the treadmill or weights late at night always helps me de-stress. And the idea of having the place practically to myself sounded perfect. If only I had known then what I know now. For the first few weeks I was in heaven. I'd arrive at the gym around 9 or 10 o'clock, when the crowds had thinned out. The staff greeted me by name and didn't seem to mind my late-night routine. I had my pick of the equipment and could take my time without waiting for anyone. I'd put in a good hour or two before heading home feeling refreshed. About a month after I joined, I decided to check out the sauna. I'd never actually used one before, but figured it would be a nice way to relax after an intense workout. That night, I did 30 minutes on the elliptical followed by some strength training exercises. My muscles ached in the best way possible. A session in the hot sauna seemed perfect. The sauna was tucked into the back corner of the men's locker room. I grabbed a towel from my gym bag and wrapped it around my waist before entering. Inside, there were 2 long wooden benches along the cedar walls. The air felt thick and steamy, infused with the rich scent of the wood. I took a seat on the lower bench and leaned back, letting my body sink into the heat. I could feel my sore muscles start to loosen and unwind. Steam rose in wispy tendrils to the ceiling as sweat began to form along my brow. I closed my eyes, enjoying the warmth seeping into me. After some time, I wasn't sure how long, I opened my eyes. My body was drenched in sweat, trickling down my back and legs. Figuring I should get out and cool down, I stood up on shaky legs and gripped the metal door handle. When I pulled, nothing happened. I tried again, harder this time. The door didn't budge. That's when the panic set in. I pounded on the door with my fists and yelled out for someone to help. But my voice barely resonated in the small space. All I could hear was the hiss of the sauna's heat. I pressed my ear to the wooden door but couldn't make out any movement or voices. The gym was eerily silent. Doing my best to stay calm, I quickly ran through my options. I didn't have my phone or any way to call for help. It was sitting in my gym bag inside a locker. Based on the emptiness of the gym, I figured I must be the only person left in the building. No one would hear me or know I needed help. I paced the length of the sauna, sweat pouring down my back as the temperature intensified. The air became harder to breathe, the steam scalding my lungs with each breath. I knew I needed to get out fast, or I'd be cooked alive. In desperation, I threw my shoulder against the door, kicked at it violently, but nothing worked. It seemed to be stuck tight. Clawing at the walls, I tore away the wooden panels, hoping to find a vent or some way to escape. But the sauna had been expertly constructed. No matter where I searched or how hard I scraped, the walls were solid. Exhausted and struggling to breathe, I collapsed onto the bench. The heat made me dizzy and weak. I realized this gym had a reputation for neglecting safety, but I had ignored the warnings. Now it seemed I would pay the ultimate price, trapped by their carelessness. Mustering my last bit of strength, I stood on shaky legs and gripped the door handle with both hands. I let out a primal scream, channeling all my adrenaline, and pulled with everything I had left. Just as my vision started to blur, the door burst open with a loud crack. Cool, blessed air rushed over my body as I stumbled out into the locker room, gasping and wheezing. I collapsed onto the tile floor, relishing the feel of it against my searing skin. I lay there for several minutes, breathing deeply and letting my body recover. When I finally felt steady enough, I stood up and slowly got dressed, every muscle still quivering. I left the gym and have never returned since that night. My unused membership sits abandoned while I now look for a new place to work out, and I am much more diligent asking about safety policies and procedures. No more late-night solo gym trips for me. I learned the hard way that conveniences like 24-hour access can sometimes come at too high a cost. I'm just grateful I found a way out of that death trap when I did. The carelessness of that gym's owners nearly killed me, and I shudder to think what might have happened had I not broken free. The memories of that sauna still haunt my dreams, but I suppose reliving it is better than the alternative. Not everyone who got locked in there was as lucky as me. For some, it became their tomb. I needed a part-time job while going to college, so I took a position as a night cleaner at the local gym. It seemed like easy money. Just a few hours vacuuming, wiping down equipment, and taking out the trash after closing time. I didn't think much about the fact that the old, sprawling gym complex was located in a converted hospital building on the edge of town. On my first night, I arrived a little before midnight to start my evening shift. The manager showed me around the entire place, pointing out all the areas I needed to clean. He handed me a set of keys, told me to lock up when I was done, and then left me alone in the huge, empty building. I got right to work, starting with vacuuming the long rows of various weight machines and equipment. As I pushed the noisy vacuum back and forth, I thought I heard a faint rustling sound behind me. I quickly turned off the vacuum and stood still, listening intently in the silence. Had I just imagined it, or was there something moving in the shadows? The cavernous rooms and hallways remained completely quiet. Uneasy, I reasoned with myself that it was simply my imagination running wild in this big, deserted building late at night. With the vacuum still off, I proceeded cautiously through the remainder of my cleaning tasks. Over the course of the next several nights on the job, I kept hearing strange, unexplained noises. They were subtle at first, just soft footsteps, barely audible voices, and other vague sounds that I couldn't place. I would whip around quickly whenever they occurred, but found nothing there. Sometimes I would notice exercise equipment that I knew for certain I had not used slightly swaying back and forth on its own, or weights shifting positions ever so slightly when I walked past them. Each night the disturbances grew more pronounced. The creepy incidents put me on edge, but I attempted to rationalize them away. Perhaps the old building was merely settling in the night, or had faulty wiring that caused the gym equipment to randomly move on its own accord. Despite my rational explanations, I couldn't ignore the nagging dread that something chilling and paranormal was occurring in the shadows. One night I was mopping the floor of the back weight room when the noises escalated dramatically, startling me. It sounded like urgent whispering and light scuffling footsteps all around me, though I could not pinpoint the source. As I stood stunned, listening to the sounds circling around me, a large yoga ball suddenly came bounding out from the back of the room, as if someone had forcefully kicked it in my direction. Heart pounding, I jumped out of the way just in time to avoid being hit. Okay, this was getting out of hand. There had to be some reasonable explanation for these incidents. I decided right then to ask the manager about the building's history, thinking maybe that would shed some light on the weird occurrences that happened at night when I was alone. The next evening, I nervously inquired about the gym's past. The manager, to my immense unease, proceeded to explain that the gym had previously been the old county hospital before being renovated into a fitness center a few years ago. The sprawling, decrepit hospital had been shut down decades prior, following numerous ominous reports of questionable medical practices, patient deaths, and neglect. Apparently, the abandoned hospital had long been rumored to be severely haunted in the years since its closure. I stood in stunned silence as the manager relayed this alarming history, a stark contrast to the modern gym facility that now occupied this troubling space. Why had he not mentioned any of this before I started working the isolated night shift here alone? Now things were starting to make some terrible sense. I was now dealing with actual ghosts or spirits trapped within these walls, not just my overactive imagination. Rather than comfort or logic, a chilling realization washed over me. Apprehensively, I entered the building for my shift later that night. Right away, I could acutely sense an ominous coldness and heavy air of dread hanging throughout the building. As soon as I began my usual cleaning routine, all of the increasingly familiar haunted activity started up in full force once again. Loud disembodied cries and voices echoing down the hallways, knocks and banging on walls, floors, and ceilings from an invisible source. Equipment would suddenly start rapidly shaking or moving on its own all around me. I continually glimpsed fleeting shadowy figures darting around in my peripheral vision, vanishing when I whipped around to confront them. The furious paranormal onslaught was intended to frighten me, and it was definitely working. I knew then that I had to take action before the hostile spirits' escalating antics got even more dangerous. There had to be some tragic reason why these tortured souls were still clinging to this location, unable to move on from their turmoil. I started thoroughly researching the old abandoned hospital's dark history, hoping to discover the motive behind the intense, angry hauntings. I also brought in sacred religious relics and burned cleansing incense to provide protection and comfort while I worked. The increased spiritual presence provided some relief from the vengeful ghosts' attacks. After much scrutiny into the hospital's past, I finally uncovered a terrible forgotten truth. Decades ago, the hospital had buried former deceased patients in unmarked graves right on the property, without permission from families. I immediately knew this desecration and lack of proper burial was the source of the spirit's unsettled rage. I enlisted a local priest to come bless and spiritually cleanse the property where the bodies lay, hoping this would finally bring them peace. The night after the purifying ceremony, the gym was the calmest it had ever been during my shift. Over time, the harrowing paranormal activity slowly decreased, until it finally ceased altogether. Relief washed over me. I had overcome the frightening haunting by selflessly giving the trapped souls the dignified peace they deserved. Needless to say, I promptly resigned from that job, thankful to leave the once haunted gym behind for good. I will never again take a night shift position in an ominous setting so lightly. I've been a gym rat for as long as I can remember. Back in high school, I lived for the adrenaline rush that came from pushing my body to its limits with each rep. The feeling of my muscles burning as I forced out those last few curls was addicting. Working out became my stress relief, my escape. So when I moved to a new city after college, finding the right gym was a top priority. I must have taken tours of at least 5 different facilities that first month before finally joining the brand new 24-hour mega gym that opened downtown. This place had everything: rows of treadmills, ellipticals and bikes, a rock climbing wall, huge selection of free weights, over a dozen group fitness studios for classes, even a spa area with saunas, hot tubs and massage. It was fitness paradise. That first week I went every single day to try it all out. I'd hit the treadmill at 6 a.m. before work, then come back for a kickboxing class on my lunch break. At night I'd pump iron for hours, enjoying having the place nearly empty at that late hour. The staff quickly learned my name and enthused about my dedication. I got to know Liz at the front desk, whose energetic greeting always started my day off right. Jeremy, the smoothie barista, whipped up custom protein shakes exactly the way I liked. And Sam, the lanky teen who restocked towels and cleaned the locker room, gave me fist bumps and extra locker room products. I was part of the community. By week 2, I began diving into the seemingly endless array of classes. I spun, zumba'd, yoga'd, kicked, punched, danced. You name it, I tried it. The motivating instructors and thumping music took my workouts to a whole new level. I was shocking myself with moves I never thought my body could handle. Of course, long soaks in the hot tub, followed by a rejuvenating steam room, were the perfect way to unwind afterward. It was on one of those late nights that I decided to check out the cedar sauna. Tucked away in the back corner of the sprawling men's locker room, I had yet to experience it. The small wooden room was empty and quiet, the gentle hiss of the heating elements and rich scent of the cedar creating an aura of relaxation. I settled onto the lower bench, leaning back and closing my eyes as the dry heat worked its magic on my sore muscles. Heavenly. I must have dozed off at some point, lulled into a sleepy state of total calm. When I startled awake, finding myself drenched in sweat, I knew time had gotten away from me. Standing up fast, I strode the few steps to the door and grabbed the metal handle. But instead of opening, the door remained tightly closed. That first wave of confusion washed over me. I tugged harder, throwing my weight into it as panic started creeping in. It was stuck fast. Trapped. I was trapped. Desperate, I pounded loudly on the thick wooden door, shouting for help at the top of my lungs. But my cries echoed hollowly through the steamy air. Pressing my ear to the door, only ominous silence greeted me. It was nearly midnight on a weeknight. Chances were I was the only person left in the massive facility. Pulse racing, I racked my brain for a way out. No phone, no way to signal for help. The cedar walls were solid planks without even an air vent. Kicking and slamming my shoulder into the door accomplished nothing except deep bruises. I even tried prying the wooden panels apart with my fingers, which only resulted in splinters and cuts. The door had me sealed in tight. Panic threatened to overtake me as sweat poured off my skin. The temperature was becoming unbearable, moisture streaming into my eyes. I screamed until I was hoarse, listening in helpless despair to the lack of answering sounds. Surely a staff member would realize I was missing soon, but as minutes dragged by in that suffocating room, I wasn't confident I had much time left. In despair, I slumped onto the bench, staring hopelessly around at the walls of this soon-to-be tomb. That's when I noticed it, a sliver of light glinting along the doorframe. Crawling over for a closer look, I realized the cedar had expanded slightly in the intense heat, leaving the door ever so slightly ajar. With this new spark of hope, I launched myself against that door with every fiber of strength left in me. I beat at it, kicked at it, threw myself against it. The old wood cracked and splintered under my assault as the gap widened and blessedly cooler air seeped in. With one final primal roar, I broke through, collapsing in a heap on the locker room floor as relief flooded through me. I later learned a faulty ventilation fan had caused the sauna to dangerously overheat and then shut down completely. The area should have been closed off, but clearly that hadn't happened. As I lay there weak and trembling on the tiles, the reality that I could have died sank in fully. I knew in that moment I'd never be returning to that gym again, no matter how profuse the apologies or free the personal training sessions they offered me. No amount of new equipment or trendy classes could convince me to take that risk again. I learned the hardest possible way that some warnings should never be ignored. When I walked in a week later, it was solely to cancel my membership and leave that death trap behind for good. The manager begged me to reconsider, making excuses about how it was just a freak accident, how they'd be installing all new sauna safety features. I tuned him out, unwilling to cut them any slack for their clear negligence. As I walked out that door, I made a silent promise to myself. I would find a better gym, one that didn't put profits above human safety, one where I wouldn't have to fear for my life just to get a workout in. Plenty of quality options existed without risking a recurrence of that horrific ordeal. I was done taking chances with subpar gyms. My life is worth more than that.